Hey everybody, welcome to my small but functional garage. Today we're going to talk about doing an overdrive conversion to your classic Ford, or like more specifically this 69 Mustang where I installed the TKO 600. I'll talk about the reasons why you might consider doing this modification, and good reasons, bad reasons, how much it's going to cost, which transmission should you use, where should you get it, and what can you expect as a result. What were my results? First off, let's talk about why you want to do this conversion. If it's just to save money on gas, you're going to have to drive a long ways to make it up. Probably 60 to 100,000 miles minimum. There's a big gap there because small block conversions are a lot cheaper than FE conversions. And that's really what I'm going to be concentrating on, by the way. Unfortunately, the FE is rare, and aftermarket parts and upgrades are also rare, which means they're a lot more expensive. And that means a lot more driving to recoup your money. The bottom line is, if you're doing this to save money on fuel, it's not worth it. However, fuel economy does make a difference. If your car sits at home in the garage and you really wish you could drive it more, it's a big investment. Anything that gets you in the seat of your car, that puts a smile on your face, that puts a smile on other people's faces, that's the best reason to do something like this. And having that additional range from the fuel economy is a big deal. Expect to pick up anywhere between, say, 25 and 35% fuel economy on the freeway. So if you're road tripping it, that's 25 or 35% further you can drive within safety ranges. With this 427, I would have thought I'd probably get about 12 miles per gallon on the freeway. I actually get about 16. I've gotten as much as 17. It's about a 33% increase in fuel economy, or 1/3. That means instead of having to stop for gas at 180 miles, I can confidently stretch it to 240, maybe even 250 or more. And when you're in the middle of nowhere looking for gas at night, that means all the difference in the world. So let's also talk about, well, if you're doing this for a resto mod, maybe you're replacing a transmission, you just want the overdrive, or you think it's cool, you're going to show the car. That's a really subjective thing, and maybe it's worth it for you and maybe not. I can't say. So I guess that's up to you. Now, the first conversion I'm going to talk about is the automatic. And when it comes to the automatic or manual or flip-flopping, staying with the same, it doesn't really matter a whole lot for a Ford. You're going to be replacing all the parts more or less anyway. So the automatic is just easier. The answer for 99% of people out there, AOD. Why? Well, you don't have to put a computer in the car, which means a lot less modification and less things to go wrong. Plus, AODs are much stronger than C4s. Finding a street strip AOD new, that's easy. It'll handle 550 horsepower. It's good for the small block, it's good for the big block, it's good for pretty much all the applications that you're going to use. And again, I'm going to suggest that you go with a kit, and that's the same with the manual. Find somebody who sells these kits that knows what they're talking about, that can answer your tech questions, and definitely always call a company that you're going to work with and see if they really know the answers. Ask them a question about, will this fit my transmission tunnel? Is this a good combo? Already have a good idea in mind about what you're going to use. That way they can help you narrow the focus rather than guess at what you're actually going to try to do. Well, you're going to need a TV cable, and you're going to need a flex plate, a torque converter, you're going to need transmission coolant lines, the transmission, a cross member, the mount, and shift linkage. Just off the top of my head. It's another reason why you should do a kit. It's all going to be made to work together, which means you're not going to spend 2 weeks of your time trying to figure out what adapter you need to fit that other component that you had that you piecemealed together yourself. So how much is this thing going to cost? Well, it's probably going to set you back about $4,000 for a small block and about $6,000 for an FE. And the reason why it's so much more for the FE is not, again, the transmission itself, it's going to be the same, but the other components, things like a bell housing. I think it's about $1,000 just for the FE bell housing on an AOD. It wasn't originally designed for it. you have to pay a really big premium. And on other components that might change, like a cross member as a result too. This is a place you don't want to cut corners, by the way. Going out and finding a used AOD and slapping it in there, hoping it's good, and based on probably dozen transmissions that I've pulled out and installed and watched my dad pull out and install out of a junkyard that are supposedly good, a good used transmission is an oxymoron. More often than not, you get somebody else's problem. Now, for the manual, there are a few more options. The primary option for small blocks is going to be the T5. If you're running a small block under 325 horsepower, the T5 is almost certainly going to be your choice. Now, if you're in that 325 to 375 horsepower range, it's kind of a gray area. Like a 351 that is running at 350 horsepower that sees a lot of track duty, it's probably going to be too much for the little T5 as a medium duty transmission. And even though the T5 is smooth and slick shifting, can handle a healthy amount of RPM, it's reliable and durable, it's not up to track duty. It's just not a heavy duty transmission. Now, if you're in the gray area, you'll also be considering the TKX. It's a completely new transmission, unrelated to the TKO series. The TKX should be, on paper, a very quiet, smooth shifting, high RPM transmission. Really fantastic and really strong. I think it's good for up to 700 or 750 pound-feet of torque. It's going to handle whatever you're going to throw to it for a street car. And for about 4% of people out there, you're probably looking at, honestly, the Magnum T56 6P. And the reason why I think so few people really want that transmission is it doesn't fit. You're going to have to cut up and weld and modify your transmission tunnel to get it in there. It's a very big transmission. It's almost 3 feet long. It weighs 135 pounds base. In order to install it into a car, even after you do that kind of fabrication, which in my opinion is best left to a shop, you're going to need to get the car high enough up off the ground, say 24 inches. You're going to need a low profile transmission jack because of the weight to get this thing all in there. It's a lot of extra stuff that most little garages like this one don't have. Well, if you're a small block, you're probably going to go with the clutch cable assembly. Works great, and no need to really do anything about it. If you have an FE, you could use the clutch cable, but honestly, if you have headers or you plan on doing a rack and pinion conversion or something, it gets pretty tight. It gets really tight. I've worked in it. It gets really tight. Your best option is probably going to go with a hydraulic clutch. That's what I chose. I also went with a hydraulic throwout bearing, though you can use the hydraulic slave cylinder, which is the standard hydraulic clutch system. The hydraulic throwout bearing takes up almost no space. It's a clearance miracle. Also, it's super smooth, self-adjusting. It's a really great unit. Thing is, if anything goes wrong with that hydraulic throwout bearing, you're going to be pulling the transmission. And if you have an adapter plate in there, it's going to be a tight squeeze to get that throwout bearing through the hole in the adapter plate. And by the way, if you're planning on using a bell housing with an FE, you pretty much have one good option. That's the QuickTime bell. So I chose Modern Driveline and discussed a whole bunch of different options with them. What I came to the conclusion of was I was right with what I was asking about in the first place. So have a good idea of what it is you're looking for. Find a company that has reviews of their products and their kits, can answer your tech questions. It doesn't matter if it's a manual or an automatic. That's the way to go. So about the costs, well, the T5 conversion can be done for maybe $3,000 if you are already a manual transmission. The Tremec TKX, probably more like, $4,000 for the small block, $5,000 plus for the FE. The Tremec T56, about $1,000 more than what I quoted for the TKX. That's about where you should be. Other things that you're going to need for this conversion, well, if you're going to do the full conversion, you're obviously going to need a shifter, a clutch pedal, either a hydraulic master cylinder and slave cylinder throwout bearing, something to connect the transmission and the clutch assembly. You're going to need a flywheel. You're going to need a transmission crossmember mount. You're going to need a lot of individual components. So just like the automatic, again, you're best off going with a kit, making sure something fits, and a kit from somebody reputable. I'm happy with the service and everything that I got from Modern Driveline. I recommend them because I had good enough results with them.
Alright, so here we are, and I'm not on the microphone right now, so this is just ambient noise inside the car. Driving down the freeway. It's pretty loud in here. I'm in overdrive right now, which makes it a lot quieter. You can see the tachometer. We're turning about, oh, I don't know, 1900 RPM and doing a little over 65. Now, if I shift out of overdrive and start giving you a feel for what this car sounds like without overdrive in fourth gear, it's pronounced, it's a lot busier. And I have 325 gears in this thing. That's 75, and I'm turning 3,400 RPM. It's pretty busy, and I'm going to lose a lot of fuel economy, even with the 427 that way. Back into overdrive. It's a big, big difference. It makes driving these cars on the freeway honestly a lot more livable if you don't have, you know, straight up highway gears.
All right, we can look at my really tight installation at this point. And what you have is in the front an adjustable proportioning valve, and just underneath it, leading back there to the firewall, is the hydraulic master cylinder for the hydraulic clutch I have. I chose to take the lines up and over the hydro boost here, which you can see like that. It's nice and tidy. The little rubber line comes from the reservoir down to the hydraulic cylinder, and then you have the stainless steel braided line with the plastic covering that goes down to the hydraulic throwout bearing. I mounted the reservoir right back there. And keep in mind, when you're going to bleed this system, basically every single pedal push you're going to use, you're going to come back out here and refill brake fluid. And that reservoir is really, really small. So it doesn't take much to run it out of brake fluid, and then you have to start all over again. And now as we follow the hydraulic line down to the hydraulic throwout bearing, you can see it enters the bell housing right in the where the clutch fork would be. The lower line is the pressure line, and the upper line comes back off the throwout bearing, and I just have it secured with a clamp over here on the firewall. The upper line is where you're going to bleed the hydraulic throwout bearing from, and the bleeding process, pretty simple, just like brakes. And of course, if you went with a hydraulic clutch with a slave cylinder, you'd have that clutch fork sticking out of the bell housing there, and the slave cylinder would mount to the bell housing and operate the clutch fork. If you chose to go with a cable clutch, I think that probably works great on a lot of applications. I wanted a little bit more space and a little bit more control over it with the big block here. But both the T5 and the TKX or TKO, they all operate using a cable system as well. You can get by with it. I wanted a nice light pedal feel, and I do have a great pedal feel.
Inside the car at the shifter, you can see it's a pretty long throw. This was the only option available to me for the FE engine and the TKO at the time. It's this Hurst shifter. I did choose the ball instead of the T-handle. It works really well. It's longer than I think what I would like for a sporty car, but you're going to have more options with the T5. You may have more options with the TKX or a small block. Probably depends on, you know, the adapters and the positioning of the transmission and all that. The boot itself is really simple. It's basically just a plate that goes on over the transmission tunnel and bolts down with 4 bolts at the corners. So that's super duper simple. And of course you access the shifter and install a shifter right underneath this panel. So the console panel comes up, you unbolt the boot, you pull that out, and you have basically an open hole that you can attach your shifter. So super easy that way too. And inside the car you can see the installation of the clutch master cylinder. And up underneath a little bit, it's very tough to get at, but the actual clutch pedal itself. The master cylinder does fit, and on modern driveline they'll say that you cannot use the Midland style booster, that the Midland style booster won't allow you clearance. I did use the Midland style booster and I was really careful. And in fact, it did just barely.
So I hope this has helped people. I hope that the videos and everything else of my installation and heading down the road were also helpful.